You're listening to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. Welcome to our Decodable text series. In this series, we will consider what the research says about decodable texts and how educators can effectively use decodable texts in classroom instruction. Today, we'll be talking to a team of educators who made Eureka Math Squared decodable and readable for students. Often, students have difficulty in math because their deficits in reading get in the way. This team of educators helped eliminate that concern so students could, quite simply, do the math. Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy Podcast. Today, we are really excited because we've received some questions from our listeners about the topic of math readability. And we've been doing our homework and gathering the right crew to discuss this question, this topic, and we have them all here today.
Yeah, we get to talk about math today.
I love it.
It's so fun.
It makes me a little uncomfortable, just a smidge, but we're going to do it.
I mean, it's really more about the readability. But
I know. We don't have to do math.
So today we have Rachel Hilton, Maria Parr, and Chrissy Hopkinson, who all work at Great Minds, and they'll talk to us about the work they did with Eureka Math Squared, along with other projects at Great Minds, to ensure that the curriculum was decodable for students at different grade levels, and why this was such an important project.
Yeah, so we're so glad you're here. Thank you all for being here. Melissa, should we just kick off with a general question?
Yeah, I think so. And I love that. Let's just start really basic. So whoever wants to jump in to answer this, when we just talk about those words, decodability, readability, what do they even mean? And specifically, what are we talking about when we talk about math in regards to those terms?
Yeah, well, I can take this one. I think we learned a lot through our project with geodes. I think this is where this all started, this understanding of reading is so much more than just blending sounds together, right? It's being able to access the information that is in front of you. And that's with decoding, putting phonetic sounds and phonetic patterns together to create a word, but also understanding what you're reading and being able to internalize that work as well. And so, that comes with phonetic sounds, sight words, but also context and background knowledge. I think that's a really important thing that can get lost in terms of readability. So when I think of readability, I think of also accessibility, being able to access the text in front of you, both physically and kind of cognitively. And so, when this all started, I think with geodes, we learned a lot about phonetic sounds, sight words, and how those can be processed by a student. Those are often memorized, and that can be heavy. That's a lot of words to memorize, right? Even though you glance right over them as you go, that's for a first-time reader, that you have to hold that in your mind every time you approach a sentence. So it can be a lot. And I think as we learned, the projects of Wit and Wisdom, PhD Science, Eureka Math Squared, they realize we need to have a united front to make sure we can provide access for students and empower them, right? We want students to be able to feel welcomed by this text, not intimidated. And in the world of math, I remember we always would just say they want the students to be able to get to the math, not being, inhibited by a word problem that's too long, or, the directions that are really meaty. And, I don't even know what the problem is in front of me because I can't read it. And then you feel kind of alone, right? You don't know, can everyone else read it? We didn't want students to feel that way. We wanted students to feel welcomed and, as I say again, empowered. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Maria. And you or either Rachel be able to just quickly snapshot geodes in like a sentence or two? Like, what are geodes for those listening? We did have a whole episode on geodes, but in case someone listening hasn't listened to that episode.
Yeah. Sure, I will. I will try. It's like, how can we do that in one sentence? As you said,
you can have a few. You're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, geodes was a project that many of us worked on at Great Minds, and they're readable texts about various topics that relate to the Wit and Wisdom modules. And so they follow a phonetic scope and sequence with a company from Wilson Foundations. And that's how we made them decodable up to 80%. And so they're readers that students can access. And based on where they are on the phonetic scope and sequence of Foundations, they will be able to access and read 80%. At least 80%. Our texts are also far above 80%, which is wonderful. But most importantly, they're about wonderful, beautiful, fascinating topics. As an author and editor on that project, I mean, we say our Jeopardy game has gotten so great because I mean, just the information and the fascinating topics that they discuss is really wonderful. And, we've gotten feedback that the students love them as well.
Yeah, they are pretty amazing texts.
I'm biased, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's okay. I feel like I've learned so much too as an adult, so many topics that were missed maybe in my childhood. So they're beautiful texts. I know teachers do love them. But okay, swinging back to math. I don't want to get too caught up. So we've now kind of talked about readability and math and those different pieces that we want students to be able to access. Well, let's talk about why readability and math is important. And I'm wondering if Chrissy might be able to kick us off for this one.
Thanks. I'd love to. This one is really near and dear to my heart. So as a teacher, a math coach, a literacy coach for 25 some years, and using a variety of math programs, including our first math program called Eureka Math, I really felt like personally, from all the teachers I've worked with and all the classrooms I've been in, that students were held back for their full power, their full access to mathematics because of the student-facing text. So when we started to architect Eureka Math Squared, we really had a few things in mind. So I'll outline those first and then break them down a little bit. One of them, and most importantly, is equity. Can we ensure every student can see themselves as a mathematician, can develop that learner identity in power as a mathematician? Can they access grade level text at all times that is high quality and engaging? And engaging, is it fun? And do they feel joyful in learning that math and feel empowered? And also the idea of accessibility. So if we take in mind that we assume learner variability is absolutely the truth, right? For all students, all classrooms, and even ourselves in any different particular subject area. Can we ensure equity, accessibility, and engagement in everything we do? So that's a very complex formula, right? Some of that has to do with hands-on math and discourse and lots of things. But one part of that, one important part of that is that reading is needed, right? In mathematics, whether it's directions or word problems. And we don't want students to cringe when they get to the small portion of the text that might, of the lesson that might include, that does include independent practice or, paper pencil practice. That's a really important part for them to actually do math and for teachers to watch them and give feedback. And we don't want them to always think that paper pencil, right? Or the word problems are the hard math or the math that they don't want to do, right? Because really, that's the math that's real. That's the math that creates future mathematicians, that involves them in really modeling problems and using the math that they know. So it was really important to us that everyone could access that. We also know, whether you use a research base or Lexile levels or any of the great things that Rachel taught us about looking at, you can just open a math text for students and get a very quick sense of how dense it is, how difficult the words are to read, how just visually frightening or I don't know. It's just not, they don't see it in a way that feels accessible or exciting. It doesn't feel like how it does during the rest of the class. So our idea was to really lower the cog load, the emotional filter when it comes to the text, and yet never eliminate the rigor. So really keep the math rigor, keep that precise math language that we know they need to be able to read, write, and speak, but get rid of those barriers around reading. One of the math practices are a lot like in reading, you have content and process standards. For us, the math practices are process standards. It's how mathematicians think. And one of them, the first one, math practice, is to persevere and understand. Many of us focus on persevere, and yet if you cannot read the text, you are virtually unable to persevere, right? Because you can't access the math, and you also are unable to understand it if the language is a barrier. So we really just wanted to eliminate that.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And thank you for, going through all of those different reasons. I think it's huge. I was just thinking as you were speaking about, at the younger grade levels, especially, we think about, the text that they're engaging with, like geodes, right? Making them engaging, making them, look like something they want to read. But when you get to math textbooks, I don't know that that is thought about too much, right? It is often just dense and not really trying to be friendly necessarily with the words that are being used, the text that's being used. Rachel, I'm wondering if you have anything to add, because Chrissy mentioned that you taught them about, what was in the other kinds of textbooks. Do you have anything to add about what you saw in the regular math texts?
Yeah, sure. So before I worked on geodes, I was a middle school and high school math teacher. And I think it's kind of like the ways in which we were trying to make math more accessible to students were kind of all the wrong ways, right? We were giving them a lot of busy sort of illustrations and blurbs and sidebars and all of these things that just sort of contribute to that idea of text density. And so, it's really, you can't really use Lexile to evaluate math text because so much of that is based off of paragraphs and paragraphs. And so one way that you could bring Lexile down is to add more text, which is not supportive of students. And so when Maria and I started developing these sort of buckets for looking at text and sort of saying how can we preserve the rigor and also really scale down the context in a way that would be more inviting, engaging, and accessible to students. So we looked at sentence length and structure. We looked at word choice. And of course, we looked at decodability, especially between grades K and 2. And we also looked at layout, like how to provide white space, chunk text, give plenty of space for students to draw, offer places for them to put their answers. So those were all things that we started looking at and developing some guidelines around for writers. And then we also worked quite closely with the subject matter experts. So I typically did reviews at the same time that the math reviewer was coming in, and we often had these conversations about what wording can we change and not change, or what content vocabulary do we need to make sure and goes in there. And so I felt like, even coming from a math background, I still felt like I learned a lot from the subject matter expert as far as saying, no, I have to be precise in this way. I don't have to be precise in saying number of teaspoonfuls of chocolate syrup. It's okay to say teaspoons of milk, but I do need to be precise in other areas and make sure I'm preserving, product, composite, difference, all of these words that students really need in order to build that, to build their math literacy.
Yeah,
Does that answer your question, right? Oh,
yeah, totally. I'm curious, and I don't know if you all have this in front of you, so feel free to say, no, we don't have that. You didn't tell us to have this. But do you have any examples of what a word problem may have looked like that was just not readable or decodable that I think our listeners would really love to hear, that and if you have the how it might have been changed?
it's a little bit of a hybrid of a problem from our old curriculum and another, to be honest, a competitor curriculum, but is very, really exemplifies what you would typically see in a grade 1 or grade 2 classroom. I don't know the verbiage exactly, but you'll get you'll get why it's so dense. So if you picture a paragraph at the top of the page, directions very close to the word problem itself. And the directions say something like, read the problem, draw a labeled picture. This is intended for grade 1, so 6 or 7-year-olds. You can think about your phonics scheme inside of there. Show how you made 10 and write your answer in a complete sentence or something like that. One line of space in paragraph format. It says something like there's 16 hedgehogs. Some of them burrow into a hole in the forest. Now there are 12. How many burrowed in underground or something like that? That is a very typical change unknown word problem type. So that's appropriate rigor, right? And appropriate numbers for the standard. But as you can tell, like, first of all, it's just so dense looking on the page. Right. Second of all, we've unpacked for them what we think their mathematical process should be to solve it and to show their thinking. When in reality, a real mathematician or a real engineer has a lot of choice around how they their solution pathway, their representations, their explanation of the answer. And then, as I'm sure you can all, chime in, like, hedgehogs aren't appropriate context, right? First of all, we're not giving accessibility for pretty much everyone on the planet at age 7 who may not know what a hedgehog is. But also, like, just the multi-syllabic words, right? Underground and hedgehog and forest, and just a lot of extra context that is not needed to get to the math.
Yeah. Also, like, burrow. That's a difficult verb.
Yeah. Rachel taught us about sentence length. So that was really important. Two of the best things that we did together in grade 1. So my work primarily as a lead writer for grade 1 was that really heavy work in layout and decodability and context. So Rachel can talk more to the upper grades and how they did some of these things, but we decided to always have a lot of white space. That was probably our first decision. And then also to drop every sentence to one line so that you can envision, instead of paragraph form, you have the first sentence, right? I think it says something like there are 16 frogs, right? And do I really need to know they're in a pond? No, I don't. I'll put an image if I want, but there's just 16 frogs, right? Some of them hop away, or some of them, leave. Something as simple as that. We probably wouldn't have used the word leave. Now there are how many frogs hopped away or left? Something as simple as that. Same word problem type, but now I've got one. It really follows what we use. We call the read, draw, write process. We ask students to, and I said a little bit about Math Practice 1, where we ask students to persevere and understand. Well, if we ask them to just read and represent one chunk at a time, we've supported that by chunking that information out for them already, both mathematically and with their literacy. We also got rid of all those crazy directions, right? We've been learning about make 10. Most students will. Some students aren't there yet, and they're going to use a different strategy or a different representation. So we just gave lots of white space, and we simply just have the words read, draw, write on the page every time all year. So once they've learned it, they've internalized those directions. They
That's
don't
so
even
smart.
have to read them. Also, just really familiar context. This one, I'll have to admit that I still have some internal conflict over this. We intentionally chose very accessible, common context. Unless we had visuals or we have context videos without words that could then supply the background knowledge or the schema for it. So frogs, right? Or school supplies or things around the home, shoes, toys, those kinds of things. So that you have to provide less background knowledge and really just let them get into the modeling of the math. We have a little bit more we could talk about, but I would love Rachel to talk a little bit more about that at the upper grade levels.
Yeah, so I actually have a sort of before and after for you if you want to hear it.
Yeah, I love the examples.
This is about a travel soccer team. So this is sort of a problem that we would be looking at to try to stream down somewhat. Siobhan is very excited about joining a travel soccer team for the spring season. She wants to determine how much money she should save for expenses related to her new team. Players are required to pay for uniforms, travel expenses, and meals. If Siobhan buys 5 uniform shirts at a time, she gets a $10 discount so that the total cost of 5 shirts would be $55. Write an algebraic equation that represents the regular price of 1 shirt. Solve the equation. Whew.
Oh, wait, hold on. Before you say anything, Rachel.
Did you already solve it, Lori? Did you solve it?
No, I didn't even pay attention to the math. I was so paying attention to the readability of it. Well, here's what I was wondering. First, I was like totally like, that's a lot to pay for. Second, I was thinking what we should do, since Melissa and I don't know the grade level, we should pick the grade level for the math that we think this is and the grade level for the readability. Like we can do a little game, Melissa.
Oh, man.
Right?
Because
I was thinking, I'm so distracted by thinking readability. I didn't listen to the math that much, but I remember enough. All right, Melissa, what do you think for the math level in this problem? What grade is the math like pertaining to?
Okay, well, I wasn't focused on that when Rachel was reading it, but I'll go ahead and guess that I'll guess 7th grade.
For the math?
I'm just guessing.
Okay, I was going to guess 3rd grade for the math, but this might just show how much we don't know about math.
I just went with equation, and I was like, when did I learn about equations?
Oh, I missed that word. I missed it. I was
first grade.
Okay.
I don't.
Yeah,
know.
we teach the word equation. That's an example of a non-readable word that we
non-readable
have to
word, but it's a math word.
Ways. Yeah, and we don't shy away from using it. We just support it.
Sure. Okay. So now let's think about readability.
I probably would say the same. So I don't think I'm helping this.
Okay. I was thinking like
school.
I was thinking 8th or 9th grade level for readability. We should have had prizes for ourselves here. Look.
Yeah, well, right. I can only slightly narrow it down for you because we pulled these and sort of like grouped them by level. So this is, I think this is maybe a 4th or 5th grade problem. I don't know if you remember, Chrissy, when we pulled it.
Oh, okay. We'll split the difference, Rachel. All right.
4.5 grade. Let's see. And I think if I remember correctly, this was at about a 9th or 10th grade reading level.
Holy moly.
I know.
Can I add something in really quick, Rachel? I was thinking about what you guys were saying in the beginning around the difference between decoding and comprehending and understanding, right? And the connection. Mm-hmm. And as a former 4th and 5th grade teacher, I may have students who could decode that, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't know if on top of the math and just the perseverance it takes to get through the length, and I've already decoded that, I've just lost so much perseverance, so much cognitive load. I probably have to read it 2 or 3 more times to now comprehend. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's the whole package, not even just the decodability, right? It's just getting beyond that whole, look and feel of the experience of that word problem. Again, word problems are super hard to be avoided at all costs. Save them for the end and maybe I won't have to do them.
Yeah, that is.
Which is not what we want. That's not how we want them doing those juicy tasks up front, right?
Yeah, when I would talk to writers, sometimes I would tell them like, reading is basically a leaky bucket. Like the better you are at reading, the less it leaks. But to get from one end of the sentence to the end, to the other, and make meaning, especially if you're reading slowly, it's really just hard to hold on to all that information. And that takes us to like one of our fundamental rules. We use what we call the age rule. Which is like when we were thinking about the average length of sentences, we focus on the student's age. So, 4th or 5th grade, I would want a sentence that's 9 or 10 sentences or 9 or 10 words long. And some of these sentences were about 20, 25 words long. And that it's just really hard to keep track of that kind of information. So, if I am stepping into this problem, I'm going to simplify the context, like, it's great that Siobhan is excited, but I don't need to know that actually in order to figure out what her cost is. I don't need to know what she's required to pay for. Like if that comes up in a future problem, then sure. Yeah, we can release that information, but I don't need to know that up front. And I don't need to know what season it is. Is it spring? Is it fall? Doesn't matter.
I didn't even think about that when you were reading it, all that just extra information that's not needed.
I don't remember what season was it?
Because it was the first time I heard it. It was like, I was just trying to take it all in. So I didn't know what was necessary or not.
It was spring, Lori. Spring soccer.
It's spring.
But,
okay. That's what I was saying. Like, speaking of the leaky bucket, I was so focused on everything that was coming my way. I was like, travel uniforms. So and then I got distracted. I thought, gosh, that's a lot to pay for. And, I'm thinking like a parent. Not helpful. Can I ask a quick question about the names?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Talk to me about names in math word problems. That's all I'm going to say. Help me understand how we choose names.
So for Eureka Math Squared, we had a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet was broken down by grades. And we very carefully chose a list of names that felt that were accessible to students in that grade based on decodability or just, sound spell, whatever they had gotten to. And was also, we felt, as reflective as possible of the students who would be reading these problems. And so in the younger grades, there's definitely a lot of Lynn and Max and, Val, that's sort of unavoidable. But when we got to upper grades, we definitely tried for a little bit more, just a little bit more interest, honestly. You get tired of reading about little CBC words. Yeah, exactly.
We were very intentional about diversity, but also non-gender. And so really just thinking about how we could balance that out, and then also balance it out, sort of vary it. But one of the things in the curriculum, when we had to use CVC words, right? So we had a whole phonetic sequence this amazing team made for us in grade 1 around high frequency words and quarters and phonics. And that really helped us choose our language when we weren't using a visual icon to support a word. We did use other names in our textbook. So the teacher could use, so for example, if you're sharing student work on a slide, you might have had a more interesting non-readable word that was used, so that we were trying to be more diverse in hearing names, even if we weren't in reading names, because that was difficult to do with the phonics we were allowed in the younger grades.
So in this case, I would definitely have changed the name Siobhan, just because that one is just difficult, right? For those of you who don't know, it is often spelled Siobhan, right? And so
all the Siobhans out there, it's a pretty name, but it is not beautiful. Readable for our first graders. Beautiful name.
So I might change that name to something like Amira, which would be accessible to a student in grade 4, grade 5. So that's something I would think about. And then what I would notice when reading this problem is that Siobhan is required to back add to find the total price, and then she has to divide to find the unit price. So if I'm rewriting the problem, I don't want to lose any of that. I don't want to, have her being multiplying forward or doing any of that. Let's see. I can't remember if there's anything else here that I would kind of get to. So here's the revision. See what you think. Amira buys 5 different shirts at the same price. She has a $10 gift card. After using the gift card, Amira's bill is $55. What is the price of one shirt? Show your thinking.
Yeah, so much better. I think when you read the first one, I got so caught up in discounts, and I was like, I don't even know what you were asking me to do, because there was just so much information that I was trying to take in. But that second one, I still can't do it. I would need to hear it at least one more time or have it written down. But I think it feels better.
It's interesting too.
I can actually visualize that. Yeah.
Before you're caught up in, I was caught up in the story of the soccer, the shirts and all the things.
Right.
Rachel reads it again. You're like, oh yeah. I didn't even see all that was hidden in there. You get lost in the context sometimes.
It's so true. It's like, oh wait, you wanted me to do math? I just wanted to know what was going to happen with the.
Yeah. Did they win? Yeah. How did their season go?
Did they win the tournament?
What color were their uniforms?
And let's just say we'll talk a little bit later about different things that you could do in your classroom to kind of, if you can't, obviously, edit your own curriculum all the way down. So there are definitely ways that you can co-create a story to engage students. We are not saying don't engage students. We're just saying be very mindful of what it is that's on a page in front of a student. Like, not trying to erase the fun, just trying to make it accessible.
That's a really good point.
I guess I'm wondering, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know about the process for making this readable before we jump into some general readable directions? Like if you were going to help someone who maybe doesn't have a curriculum like Eureka Math Squared.
Yeah, I can say, one of the things that we thought about is we thought about multilingual learners. We thought about students with dyslexia. We thought about reluctant readers. We tried to get all of these groups in our minds. And sometimes these groups have conflicting needs. And so you have to sort of navigate those differences. But that when we were thinking about changing context, we were always holding those groups. So we were thinking about okay, what's going to be familiar to a student coming in? Is it easier for them to know the words or the phrase piece of construction paper, or is it easier to know pencil, right? And so a lot of what you're doing is just sort of paring away the stuff that would be frustrating or long, or, you can look at a chunk of text and tell how long it is. If it's 6 lines, you know that it's different than 2.5 lines. So that was one thing that we tried to do is think about what words have cognates that could be helpful, like what in Spanish or, Arabic or anything that sort of would come up. And let's see, we thought about how much does a student need in order to do a problem? Does a student need to know that the shoes are in the, Mel has 3 red shoes in her closet? Or is it okay if she just has 3 red shoes? And where is the other shoe? I don't know. So it's things like that we were really just trying to put ourselves in the place of that student. And that's the thing that maybe is the most powerful thing you can do as a teacher is, of course, your students, what's going to be difficult for them. And what's going to be difficult for them that doesn't have to do with math. And that's the thing is if they've got a cognitive load, put it on the math, empower them to really step up and see themselves as a mathematician, even if they don't see themselves as a reader. And that's really what we were trying to do is say, just because you're not, comfortable reading doesn't mean you can't be super comfortable with math. And that's our goal.
I would add on that I could not agree more, but it is really challenging when you are not presented with student text in this format. And even just giving them a sticky note or a piece of paper so they can visually chunk, right? And just get rid of that visual filter of how difficult it is and just look at one little piece at a time. I think that can really help. And we just used a lot of visual. So if there's any way that you could support the context, support some challenging words, like if you're stuck with burrowing hedgehogs in a forest, a very simple visual can at least just get rid of the need to have to really read those words, understand them, create the visual for themselves. I think that's really important too. We used both visuals in the forms of videos or an image on the page or those little just visual supports. Some people might think of them as rebus or icon. They aren't really either one of those, but just little images above words they might not be able to read. I just think really helped people a lot, students.
And I'll just add just one more thing to round it out is, of course, non-readable, non-decodable words are unavoidable in some situations, right? You have to use them. So creating a readable, accessible entry point so that the students don't shut down immediately on the word or scenario they don't understand. Instead, kind of a nice glide into the word problem, example for colors, right? Instead of orange, yellow, and blue, maybe, but you need to use the word orange. Why don't you do red, black, orange, right? Things that might be phonetically decodable so the student isn't intimidated at first. And the orange goes at the end because they can kind of get to that point and feel empowered and be like, oh, I read the first 2. I can try the third. Things like that, because as we said, certain words are unavoidable.
I'm really glad you said that. That is one place that was probably the biggest challenge for Rachel and I, particularly in grade 1. The standards are pretty heavy. Like we have comparison, equations. There are some very challenging math concepts for 6-year-olds, believe it or not. And we do conjectures around equality and true false equations in first grade. That's a pretty big deal for very young students. And words like equation, number path, representation, those are words that we are in the standards that we don't want to leave. So I love what you just talked about, sort of like wrapping it around with full support and full readability. And then we actually tell the teacher. So if you are a classroom teacher that doesn't have this kind of curriculum or this kind of text, if you could recognize what those really important mathematical words are that cannot be accurately represented with an image, like you cannot represent count mathematically with precision, right? There's so many versions of that word and ways to go about it. Like we were like, you cannot have an image for count. But if the teacher knows it and warns the students, and you look at it, you identify it, you talk about it, that at least gives them a filter for that word. And hopefully everything wrapped around it is pretty readable.
I'm wondering if you want to talk a bit more about, or if you have anything to add about just this connection between literacy and math. I'm imagining like the teachers out there who are both literacy and math teachers and thinking like, on my literacy class, I want, I'm trying to do one thing. Is this something different that I'm doing in math? How do they complement each other? How do they work together?
You wonder if there's like a level of practicing, right? What you learn in your literacy block, literacy class, when you get to math, being able to practice those sounds as you would with in, a decodable reader, a geode, something like that, where you're practicing and learning those things. And again, through that practice, feeling empowered. And then when you get to math, right? Hey, I just learned that phonetic pattern. We've been practicing it. I can read that word. And then who doesn't love to kind of check a box and feel like they did something? And then maybe they'll feel more empowered to the word problems that they see and things like that. I don't think it needs to be, and please jump in if I'm wrong. It's not a test, right? That you can read that word. It shouldn't, right. That's not where these things need to be assessed, right? It's more, this is a chance for practice and translating what you've learned into a different setting.
I really like that. And I think in the older grades, it's a great opportunity to think about different text structure, different purpose of text, right? Ways that they read differently, ways that you might visualize differently or comprehend or close read differently. Like close reading, I'm sorry, is that still appropriate in the science of reading? Haven't been a literacy coach. I've been writing math for a few years, but that idea of rereading, right, for different purposes and visualizing, I think there's a lot of process standards that in reading that could be applied to this sort of, nonfiction or different text structure. The same as we teach kiddos to write and explain differently in mathematics than we might for a different genre. I think that this is a great opportunity to read a different genre.
And I think if you look at Eureka Math Squared, there's a lot of crossover from Wooden Wisdom in the sense of that curriculum also uses art, and kids, notice and wonder. They notice and wonder about groups of figures. They make up math problems that have to do with that piece of fine art. When they look at a read, draw, write problem, they often do a notice and wonder, and what we would call in Wooden Wisdom an organize. They write down the numbers that they see and how, like, well, I've noticed that, these people, 5 people in yellow jerseys plus one more person makes 6. Like, we ask them to do that same sort of creative and yet really powerful thinking in that direction. So I think, there's a nice flow there as far as thinking about what are the tools that help students with literacy, often translate straight over to what helps them with math literacy, what helps them to be able to read and speak and listen and write in the language of math.
I love that. And part of it too is those softer skills, right? I think it's more common for us to say everyone needs to be a reader. Everyone is a reader. Everyone has the capability of reader. Like everyone loves reading, right? And yet even here we've had some jokes about like, oh, we don't want to do math, or math is scary, or I might not be a math person, right? And if we could connect those thinkings, right? Because math is an equity issue. Math is empowering. We do need to start at the very youngest grades, kindergarten students, thinking themselves as mathematicians, feeling like mathematicians, having the content and the mathematical habits of mind of mathematicians. Because getting them to fifth grade and staying on grade level content ensures they're in grade level content in middle school. Why is that important? Because every single child needs access to algebra. That creates choices, economic choices, personal choices. That's empowering. That is, social justice in a way that ensures all students are mathematically literate and empowered. And so if we can have that same kind of feeling in literacy, like look at all the ways reading empowers you in your life. Like you can read directions, you can read labels, right? You can enjoy stories. It's the same thing in math. Like look around you. We really try very hard, particularly in the younger grades, to mathematize their world and see how math makes you a better person, makes you a happier person, gives you more choices in life. We've got history elements that show how people from all over the world, all over the time, have used math to solve problems and to ask really great, interesting questions. And people that look like the students that are working in our math books and who are doing math, people who look like them are doing really amazing STEM careers. And there's lots of opportunities to be inspired by those people. And so I think if we could just apply some of those reading softer skills to math, we're just going to make really, really incredible students who are capable and achieve greatness. And I think that's a great partnership.
I feel like that was a bit of a mic drop moment.
I agree. I loved hearing that. I also love that there's so much as you were speaking, I just kept thinking of the word intentionality. There's so much intentionality that went into Eureka Math Squared. And I'm not I know there's teachers out there who are like, how can I get my hands on it? If you can't get your hands on it, what I'm hearing you all say is there's ways to make this accessible for the students who you have in front of you, like the text that you're showing to students, what's being displayed, the visuals, how can we make the visual representation cleaner and clearer? And then, of course, like word choice and language. So there are some things that we can do to help our students, and all in the name of empowerment. That intentionality is really, really important.
Yeah. And I would add Chrissy's note from before of just covering parts of the page, right? Mm-hmm. Just, helping students not be overwhelmed by just looking at it. That's the most basic thing you can do, I think.
Yeah,
I agree. Mm-hmm. One of our instructional routines is called co-construction. You could Google it. It's a pretty common one. But you can co-construct with your class a word problem out of virtually anything, any image. It could even be, oftentimes it could be something out of a book that you read in literacy. Like, can we mathematize this? What do you notice? What do you wonder? Let's write a problem about what we read this morning in our geodes book, or show a little clip of a frog jumping. What do you notice? What do you wonder? How far? How about this frog? Or, just any action that happens in your classroom. So-and-so has this many cubes, or this many students in line. How long did we wait? If you're looking for those math opportunities, instead of using the problem that's in the book, just think about that content, right? What math are we asking them to do? And write a word problem together with students. They don't even need to read it. They've constructed it with you. They're internalizing it. Now we're asking them to model and find a solution.
That's so smart. I do similar things with my 3-year-old, but it's very basic math.
That is so awesome. You are empowering him or her right now. Good for you. The grocery store is the best chance for that. We do it all naturally.
Unless you do all your ordering online these days, then there's no opportunity for that. But that's probably that's a different kind of math problem. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for teaching me the word mathematize today. I'm going to use it in everyday language. And thank you all for being here and for sharing how you made this the most accessible math curriculum, I'm going to say, in the world. Why not? Love that. Thank you so much. This is awesome. I learned so much from you all today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening, literacy lovers. To stay connected with us, sign up for our email list at literacypodcast.com.
And to keep learning together, join the Melissa and Lori Love Literacy Podcast Facebook group. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter.
If this episode resonated with you, take a moment to share with a teacher friend or leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Just a quick reminder that the views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests of the Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast are not necessarily the opinions of Great Minds PBC or its employees.
We appreciate you so much, and we're so glad you're here to learn with us.